Blood drained from Denise's face as four identical black government SUVs surrounded the diner, their tinted windows concealing whoever had come for her. The whispers started immediately. Another black person being targeted, they said. 6 months of quiet kindness to a hungry child had somehow made her dangerous. As the tall military officer emerged, his uniform gleaming with medals, Denise gripped the counter and prepared for the worst. She never expected what happened next. Before we go any further, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below with your city or country. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button to join our community of storytellers dedicated to Black voices and experiences. Denise Johnson was 34 years old, a fixture at Crossroads Diner for nearly 6 years now. Her life followed the same careful routine each day. Wake before dawn, secure her apartment, walk the 12 blocks to work, tie her faded blue apron around her waist, and greet the morning regulars with a warm smile that never revealed the vigilance behind it. As the only black employee at the diner, Denise had learned long ago that her actions were scrutinized differently. Where her white coworkers could make mistakes that were laughed off as simple errors, her smallest missteps became evidence of incompetence. Where they could show emotion, her professional composure was non-negotiable. Where they could give occasional freebies to favorite customers without comment, her generosity invited suspicion. She lived alone in a modest one-bedroom apartment on the east side of town, the walls adorned with framed photographs turned slightly yellow at the edges. Her father, Command Sergeant Major Richard Johnson, stood tall in his army dress uniform in the largest frame. His expression serious, but with kindness in his eyes that reminded Denise of her own reflection. He had passed away during his final deployment when Denise was just 18, her mother following 2 years later after a swift and merciless battle with cancer. The apartment wasn't much, but it was hers, paid for with double shifts and careful budgeting. On her bedside table sat her most precious possession, her father's leather-bound journal from his deployments, filled with observations about humanity and service that had shaped Denise's worldview since childhood. "Morning, Denise," called Harold, a retired mailman who occupied the same counter stool every day at 6:15 a.m. "Coffee black, 2 sugars." "Coming right up, Mr. Harold," Denise responded with the same warmth she'd offered yesterday and would offer tomorrow. "You hear about that break-in over on Maple?" asked Shirley, sliding onto the stool beside Harold. "They're saying it might be connected to those kids from the east side who've been hanging around lately." Denise kept her expression neutral as she poured Shirley's coffee, recognizing the coded language that implicated youth from the predominantly black neighborhood where she lived. This was Crossroads, where casual prejudice was served alongside breakfast specials, and Denise had mastered the art of selective hearing for her own survival. "Order up," called Max from the kitchen, sliding 2 plates onto the pass-through window. Denise collected them with practiced efficiency, delivering breakfast to a young couple in booth 3 before wiping down the recently vacated booth 6. As she worked, she maintained awareness of her surroundings, who watched her too closely, whose eyes followed her movements with unwarranted suspicion, which customers preferred not to be served by her at all. It wasn't paranoia if the concerns were justified by experience. "Denise, table 8 needs more napkins," said Rebecca, another waitress who consistently delegated her own responsibilities to Denise despite them sharing the same job title. "I'll take care of it," Denise replied, never pointing out the pattern, never creating waves. Todd Parker, the diner's manager, watched from behind the register, his expression unreadable. He wasn't overtly hostile like some employers Denise had encountered over the years, but he held her to standards her white coworkers never faced and questioned expenses when they involved her tables in ways he never did with others. This was the delicate balance Denise maintained, providing service with dignity while navigating the daily microaggressions that made her hyper-aware of her visibility in spaces where people who looked like her remained the exception rather than the rule. It was on a Tuesday in late September when Denise first noticed the boy. He couldn't have been older than 11, with warm brown skin, curly black hair cut close to his head, and eyes that seemed to absorb everything while revealing nothing. His mixed-race features were striking, high cheekbones, a straight nose, and expressive eyes that suggested stories beyond his years. He sat in the corner booth farthest from the door, a backpack too large for his frame propped beside him and a book always open on the table. The booth offered a clear view of both the entrance and the emergency exit, something Denise noticed immediately, recognizing the strategic positioning. She approached with a menu and her standard greeting. "Good morning, welcome to Crossroads. Can I get you started with something to drink?" The boy looked up, his expression carefully neutral. "Just water, please. With a straw." "You got it," Denise replied, not commenting on his solitude or the absence of an adult. She brought his water with the promised straw and a small plate with 2 lemon wedges, an extra touch she offered to all her customers. "Thank you," he said with a nod so slight it was barely perceptible before returning to his book. Denise gave him space, checking back occasionally to refill his water or ask if he needed anything else. Each time, he declined with quiet politeness. After 45 minutes, he closed his book, carefully tucked it into his backpack, and left exactly enough change on the table to cover his water plus a modest tip. The second day was the same, and the third. By the end of the first week, Denise had observed his pattern. He would arrive at 7:10 a.m., precisely 50 minutes before the elementary school 3 blocks away rang its first bell. He would sit, read, sip his water slowly, watching as other customers ordered full breakfasts, pancakes, eggs, bacon, toast. At 7:55 a.m., he would close his book, leave his small payment, thank her quietly, and disappear until the next morning. He never ordered food, never explained his presence, never caused any trouble. But Denise recognized the careful glances he cast toward other diners' plates. She noticed how he would swallow subtly when the scent of fresh pancakes wafted past his table. Most of all, she recognized the particular vacancy in his eyes, one she had seen in her own reflection during the difficult years after her parents died, when pride had prevented her from accepting help and hunger had become a familiar companion. On the 9th day, Denise made a decision. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she said, setting down a plate of golden pancakes drizzled with maple syrup and topped with sliced strawberries. "The kitchen made an extra order by mistake. I was going to throw these out, but—" she shrugged, as if the solution had just occurred to her. "Would you mind helping us out by taking them? Hate to see good food go to waste." The boy looked up, suspicion battling with hunger in his expressive eyes. "It's no trouble," Denise continued, placing silverware wrapped in a napkin beside the plate. "Sometimes orders get mixed up. Better to eat them than toss them, right?" She walked away before he could protest, busying herself with other customers while surreptitiously watching from the corner of her eye. After a long moment of internal deliberation that played across his features, the boy carefully picked up the fork. His first bite was tentative, but the second came more quickly. By the third, his shoulders had relaxed just slightly. When Denise returned 10 minutes later, the plate was empty, and the boy's eyes remained fixed on his book, a deliberate avoidance that spoke volumes. "Thank you," he whispered as she collected the plate, still not making eye contact. "No problem at all," Denise responded casually, as if she hadn't just crossed an invisible barrier between them. "Have a good day at school." A flicker of surprise crossed his face at her acknowledgement of his destination, but he simply nodded and returned to his reading. The next morning, Denise accidentally brought him a plate of scrambled eggs and toast. "Kitchen's having an off day," she explained with a conspiratorial smile. "Mind helping us out again?" This time, the suspicion in his eyes was tempered with something new, a cautious recognition of the kindness being offered and the dignity with which it was presented. It became their unspoken ritual. Each morning, Denise would bring a different mistake from the kitchen: French toast with cinnamon one day, a small bowl of oatmeal with brown sugar and raisins the next, a breakfast sandwich with extra bacon when the mornings grew colder. The boy never asked for anything, never initiated conversation beyond a quiet, "Thank you," but he ate every bite, sometimes so quickly it seemed he feared the food might disappear if he didn't. "Who's that kid you keep serving?" asked Rebecca one morning, her tone carrying an edge of suspicion. "Never seen him with any parents." "Just a regular," Denise replied neutrally, continuing to prepare coffee for another table. Seems weird, him coming in alone like that every day, Rebecca pressed. You know him from somewhere? Not really, Denise said. He's quiet, pays for his water, never causes trouble. Rebecca's eyes narrowed slightly. Then why are you always bringing him food he doesn't order? The question hung in the air, its implication clear. Denise continued working, her movements fluid and unhurried despite the scrutiny. Kitchen mix-ups, she said simply. Better than throwing good food away. Rebecca didn't appear convinced, but Denise had learned long ago that over-explaining often created more suspicion rather than less. She moved on to her next table, aware of Rebecca's eyes following her across the diner. Later that week, Denise began leaving small notes tucked under the boys' plates. Nothing intrusive or personal, just simple affirmations that required no response. Math test today? You've got this. Cold morning. Stay warm out there. That book looks interesting. Hope it's a good story. She never mentioned the notes, and the boy never acknowledged them directly. But occasionally, she would catch him carefully folding the small paper and tucking it into his pocket rather than leaving it behind. A tiny indication that perhaps her words mattered as much as the food. On a particularly cold Thursday in November, Denise noticed faint bruising around the boy's wrist when his sleeve rode up as he reached for his water. The marks were distinct, finger-shaped, and told a story that made her stomach clench. She said nothing, recognizing that questioning him would likely drive him away. Instead, she brought him an extra side of fruit and a slightly larger portion of breakfast potatoes that day. The next morning, she found a carefully folded origami crane on his table after he left, the first voluntary offering in their silent exchange. Beneath it was his usual payment for water, plus an extra quarter. Denise picked up the delicate paper creation with careful fingers, a smile touching her lips as she slipped it into her apron pocket. That afternoon, she tucked the crane inside her father's journal, between pages where he had written, "The greatest acts of courage often happen in silence, without witness or reward. It's not the recognition that matters. It's the choice to act when action is needed." Sometimes we see ourselves in others' struggles. Have you ever helped someone because you recognize their pain? Type "recognize" in the comments if this resonates with you. And subscribe to our channel to witness more stories of quiet courage against overwhelming odds. When we recognize each other's humanity, we begin the real work of healing our divided communities. Back to our story. Their quiet routine continued for nearly 2 months. As winter approached, Denise noticed the boy's thinning jacket and how he tucked his hands under his thighs for warmth before the food arrived. One morning, she accidentally left a pair of gloves beside his plate, claiming another customer had forgotten them weeks ago. The boy studied them with that same careful hesitation before sliding them into his backpack with a barely perceptible nod of thanks. But the comfortable rhythm they had established was about to face its first real challenge. Officer Mike Brennan, a local policeman who regularly took his coffee breaks at the diner, had begun watching their interactions with increasing interest. "That kid comes in alone every day?" he asked Denise one morning, his tone casual, but his eyes sharp beneath heavy brows. "Yes," Denise replied simply, refilling his coffee. "He's quiet, never causes any trouble." Officer Brennan responded, stirring his coffee slowly. "Seems odd, don't you think? No supervision, same time every day?" Denise maintained her professional smile. "Lots of kids stop somewhere on their way to school. Nothing unusual about it." Officer Brennan's gaze followed the boy as he left the diner. "You know his name? Where he lives?" "I respect my customer's privacy," Denise answered carefully. "He pays for his water, sits quietly reading his book, and leaves for school. That's all I need to know." "Interesting that you're so protective of a kid you claim not to know," the officer remarked, his eyes now fixed on Denise. "And those extra meals you keep bringing him? That normal diner policy?" The implication hung in the air between them. Denise felt her heart rate increase, but kept her expression neutral. "Just kitchen mix-ups," she said evenly. "Better than throwing it away." "Right." Officer Brennan nodded, his disbelief evident. "Kitchen makes mistakes on exactly the same table every day." He leaned forward slightly. "Look, I'm just saying, A single black woman taking special interest in a young boy, giving him free food, not asking questions about where his parents are. People might get the wrong idea. The racial undertone of his comment wasn't lost on Denise. She'd heard similar insinuations throughout her life. The assumption that her intentions couldn't possibly be pure, that her blackness somehow tainted her actions with suspicion. "I appreciate your concern, officer," she replied, her voice steady despite the anger building beneath her calm exterior. "But I'm just doing my job. Now, can I get you anything else this morning?" News of Officer Brennan's interest spread quickly through the diner staff. Rebecca began watching Denise more closely, occasionally making comments within earshot of customers. "I mean, it is weird," she said loudly to another waitress while Denise prepared an order nearby. "Why that particular kid? And why is she so secretive about it? If everything's innocent, why not just explain?" Todd, the manager, called Denise into his office the following day, his expression tight with concern. "Denise, we need to talk about this situation with the boy," he began, gesturing for her to sit. "It's becoming a distraction." "What situation?" Denise asked, though she knew perfectly well. "You've been giving him free food for weeks now. Several customers have noticed, and Officer Brennan has raised some concerns." "Concerns about what?" Denise's voice remained calm, though her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Todd shifted uncomfortably. "About the nature of your interest in this child. About why you're going out of your way for him. About whether there's something inappropriate happening." Denise felt as though she'd been slapped. "Because I feed a hungry child? Because you're a single woman showing special attention to an unrelated minor," Todd corrected. "And because you've been secretive about it. Would this be an issue if I were white?" The question escaped before Denise could stop it. Todd's face flushed. "This has nothing to do with race, Denise. It's about liability for the diner. It's about appearances." "Appearances," Denise repeated quietly. "Yes, I'm quite familiar with how things appear when you're black in spaces where people expect you to explain your every action." Todd sighed heavily. "Look, I'm not saying you can't serve him. I'm just saying the free food needs to stop, and you need to maintain appropriate professional boundaries. No more special treatment, no more notes, which, yes, people have noticed. Just standard service." "Understood." Denise stood, smoothing her apron. "Perfectly." That evening, Denise sat alone in her apartment, her father's journal open on her lap. She turned to an entry from his third deployment, the pages worn from frequent handling. "Faced another random security check today. Third this week, while Anderson hasn't had one in months. Same uniform, same rank, different treatment. The commander says it's standard procedure, but we both know better. Fighting for a country that still questions your loyalty because of your skin, there's a special kind of courage in that. Not the battlefield kind, but the everyday kind that doesn't make headlines." Beneath it, in slightly different ink, he had added, "Remember this, Denise. Your kindness is not a crime. Your blackness does not make your intentions suspect. Stand firm in your goodness. It's the only way things ever change." Her father had understood what she now faced. The burden of having her humanity filtered through the lens of prejudice. The expectation that her motives required more scrutiny than others. She traced his handwriting with her finger, drawing strength from his words across time. The next morning, Denise arrived at work with a quiet determination. When the boy took his usual seat, she brought him water with lemon, just as before. But this time, when kitchen mix-ups created an extra plate of French toast, she paid for it herself, tucking the receipt carefully into her apron pocket. "Company policy update," she explained quietly as she set the plate before him. "All food has to be accounted for now, even mistakes. But I already paid for this, so you'd be doing me a favor by eating it." The boy studied her face, seeming to understand more than she'd said. He nodded slightly and began to eat, his eyes occasionally darting to where Todd watched from behind the counter. "Have you ever been forced to change how you help others because your intentions were questioned? Share your experience in the comments if you felt the sting of unwarranted suspicion, and subscribe now to join thousands who believe in standing firm against prejudice. Your story matters to our community. For the next 3 weeks, their ritual continued with this subtle adjustment. Denise kept all receipts, documenting each meal she purchased for the boy. She no longer left notes, but sometimes slipped an extra fruit cup or chocolate milk onto his tray. Small acts of kindness that wouldn't draw attention but might brighten his day. The boy seemed to sense the tension surrounding their interactions. He became even quieter, his shoulders hunched slightly as if trying to make himself smaller, less noticeable. But each morning, he still arrived at precisely 7:10 a.m., his backpack slightly more worn, his eyes carrying the same careful watchfulness. Denise noticed that Officer Brennan had increased his visits to the diner, often timing his coffee breaks to coincide with the boy's presence. He would sit at the counter, nursing his coffee while observing their interaction with calculated casualness. Several times, she caught him writing notes in a small pad after the boy left. In early December, Denise arrived at work to find two men in suits speaking quietly with Todd in his office. Through the glass partition, she saw them show something that looked like a badge. Their conversation ended abruptly when they noticed her watching, and they quickly exited through the back door without entering the main diner. "Everything okay?" Denise asked as she tied on her apron. "Fine," Todd replied tersely. "Just some health department follow-up." But Denise had worked in enough restaurants to know that health inspectors didn't carry badges or conduct interviews in private. Something else was happening, something that made her stomach knot with apprehension. That afternoon, while shopping at the grocery store after her shift, Denise noticed a car idling across the street from her apartment building. The same car was there the following morning when she left for work, and again when she returned. Different driver, same watchful presence. Then came the letter, an official-looking envelope from Child Protective Services requesting an interview regarding her regular contact with a minor child. The language was bureaucratic, but the implication was clear. Someone had reported her. Denise called the number listed, her hands trembling slightly as she explained that she was simply a waitress who served a young customer. "We have to follow up on all reports, Ms. Johnson," the intake worker explained. "The complaint suggests you've been giving special attention and gifts to a child without parental consent or supervision. Given your position, we need to investigate." "My position?" Denise repeated. "You mean as a waitress?" The brief hesitation told her everything. "All relevant factors will be considered," the worker replied diplomatically. The following Monday, a CPS worker named Sandra Whitman arrived at the diner during Denise's shift, requesting to observe her interactions with the child in question. The woman sat at a nearby booth, clipboard in hand, watching as Denise performed her normal duties. When the boy arrived for his usual breakfast, Denise felt a surge of protective instinct. She approached his table with only water and a menu, hyper-aware of Ms. Whitman's scrutiny. "Good morning," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Just water today?" The boy looked up, confusion flickering across his features at the break in their routine. His eyes darted briefly to the CPS worker before returning to Denise. "Yes, please," he said quietly. "Just water." Denise nodded and moved away, feeling as though she had somehow betrayed him. Throughout his visit, she maintained a professional distance, not bringing him food, not engaging beyond what was strictly necessary. The boy sensed the change immediately, his posture becoming more rigid, his eyes more guarded. When he left that day, he placed his payment on the table with deliberate precision, his expression unreadable. The CPS worker made notes throughout the encounter, occasionally glancing between Denise and the boy with clinical interest. "Will there be anything else?" Denise asked Ms. Whitman after the boy had gone. "No, that's sufficient for now," the woman replied, closing her folder. "We'll be in touch if we have further questions." That evening, Denise sat on her fire escape despite the cold, watching the street below as occasional snowflakes drifted past. The surveillance car was gone, but the feeling of being watched remained. She had done nothing wrong, had simply fed a hungry child, offered small kindnesses without expectation. Yet her actions had been twisted by suspicion, her blackness transforming her compassion into something requiring investigation. The injustice of it burned in her chest. The following morning, Denise prepared herself for the boy's arrival with renewed determination. She had done nothing to be ashamed of, and she refused to let fear dictate her actions. But as 7:10 a.m. came and went, the corner booth remained empty. Perhaps he was running late. Perhaps the weather had delayed him. By 7:30, Denise began to worry. By 7:45, she accepted that he wasn't coming. Still, she prepared a small breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, his favorite, and kept it warm just in case. The boy didn't appear the next day either, or the next. A week passed with no sign of him, and Denise began to wonder if the official scrutiny had driven him away. Had he sensed the danger of their connection? Or had something worse happened? "Told you these things never last," Rebecca remarked as Denise cleared the untouched plate from the boy's usual booth on the 6th day of his absence. "They take what they can get and disappear. That's how it always goes." Denise said nothing, but the worry gnawed at her. Where was he? Was he safe? Was he hungry? On the 10th day of his absence, Denise noticed a customer taking photos of the empty booth, where she still occasionally left a meal just in case. The next morning, she discovered why. A local Facebook group had shared the images with a mocking caption: "Black waitress at crossroads still setting places for her imaginary charity case after CPS investigation." The comments beneath were worse. "Classic attempt to play the white savior role. But she's not white, lol. But she claimed she was helping underprivileged kids while stealing food. Why would anyone let their kid be alone with someone like that? People need to be more careful these days. You never know what someone's real intentions are." The clear racial undertones of the comments stung like physical blows. Denise had never considered herself particularly vulnerable to others' opinions, but the cruelty and prejudice on display cut deeply. That evening, alone in her apartment, she questioned her actions for the first time. Had she overstepped by helping the boy? Had she inadvertently put him at risk by drawing attention to him? Was Rebecca right? Had he simply moved on once the free meal stopped? When has your kindness been mistaken for something else? When have your good intentions been twisted by prejudice? Type "misjudged" in the comments if you've ever had your heart questioned because of your skin color. Subscribe now to join our community where these truths are spoken and honored. Your story deserves to be heard. The morning of the boy's 23rd absence, Denise arrived at work with diminished expectations. The habit of looking toward the door at 7:10 a.m. remained, but the sharp anticipation had dulled to a quiet resignation. Still, she prepared a small plate of pancakes just in case and placed it at his usual booth. At 9:17 a.m., everything changed. The diner fell silent as 4 identical black government SUVs pulled into the small parking lot, their synchronized arrival causing conversations to halt mid-sentence. Denise, carrying a coffee pot to table 12, felt the weight of suddenly attentive eyes shift from the vehicles to her. Someone whispered, "What did she do?" loud enough for her to hear. Officer Brennan, seated at the counter, straightened his posture and touched his service weapon instinctively, watching the vehicles with professional interest. From the lead SUV emerged a tall black man whose posture alone commanded respect. His military dress uniform gleamed with medals and insignia that marked him as someone of significant rank. 2 junior officers flanked him as he surveyed the diner before walking deliberately toward the entrance, a sealed envelope in his white-gloved hand. Rebecca rushed to the kitchen, hissing to anyone who would listen, "They're coming for Denise." I knew something wasn't right about her and that boy. Denise set down the coffee pot with trembling hands. Throughout her life, authority figures in uniform had rarely meant protection for people who looked like her. The bell above the door chimed as the officers entered, and the diner became so quiet Denise could hear the soft hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. Todd emerged from the back office, nervously adjusting his tie. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" he asked, his voice higher than normal. The senior officer removed his cap, revealing closely cropped gray hair. "I'm looking for someone who works here," he said, his deep voice carrying through the silence. "A woman named Denise Johnson." Every eye in the diner turned toward her. Denise stepped forward, chin raised despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "I'm Denise Johnson," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. The officer's stern expression remained unchanged as he studied her. "I'm Brigadier General James Wilson, United States Army Special Operations Command." He approached her with measured steps, stopping at a respectful distance. Am I correct in understanding that you've been serving a young boy breakfast here for the past few months? Denise felt her throat tighten. This wasn't about her after all. It was about the boy. Had something happened to him? Had her kindness somehow put him in danger? Yes, sir, she answered, aware of Officer Brennan shifting to stand nearby, as if preparing to intervene. General Wilson nodded once. And you did this without asking questions, without knowing who he was or why he came alone. That's correct, Denise replied. He was hungry. That's all I needed to know. A ghost of a smile touched the general's lips. Indeed. He extended the envelope toward her. This is a letter from the commanding general of Joint Special Operations, along with a personal message I've been asked to deliver. Denise hesitated before accepting the envelope, confusion replacing fear. I don't understand. The boy you've been feeding, General Wilson explained, is Tyler Washington, son of Captain Marcus Washington, one of our most decorated Special Forces officers. Captain Washington was deployed on a classified operation 7 months ago. As the general spoke, one of his aides opened the door, and 2 more military personnel carefully helped a man in a wheelchair navigate the diner entrance. Dressed in his service uniform adorned with medals and ribbons, his powerful frame now slightly diminished, the man's eyes immediately found Denise across the room. What Captain Washington didn't know, the general continued, was that shortly after his deployment, Tyler's foster placement became problematic. The boy was too afraid of being removed from his hometown and school to tell anyone. He managed alone, using the small emergency fund his father had left, making it stretch beyond imagination. A collective murmur of shock rippled through the diner. Denise's eyes moved from the general to the man in the wheelchair, whose face now held a mixture of grief and profound gratitude. Captain Washington was severely injured 3 months into his mission, General Wilson said. His recovery has been long and difficult. While hospitalized, he received letters from Tyler, who never mentioned being alone, but did write about a kind black waitress named Denise, who somehow always had extra food for him each morning. The captain wheeled himself forward, stopping beside the general. His voice, though quieter than his superiors, carried the weight of emotion rarely displayed in military men. Ms. Johnson, he said, looking directly at Denise. When I was finally conscious enough to truly understand my son's letters, I realized he was alone and trying to hide it. Military intelligence located him within hours, but what kept me going through months of rehabilitation was knowing that someone had seen my son's hunger and responded with kindness instead of questions. You preserved not just his well-being, but his dignity. Captain Washington reached into his breast pocket and removed a handwritten note. This is Tyler's last letter to me before we were reunited. He wrote, Dad, I'm okay because of Miss Denise. She never made me feel like a charity case. She just acted like feeding me was the most natural thing in the world. She never told anyone I was alone, never made me feel ashamed. She leaves me notes sometimes that make me feel like someone sees me. I think she must know what it's like to be invisible. Tears welled in Denise's eyes as she accepted the letter with trembling hands. She recognized the careful handwriting from the small notes that occasionally accompanied payment for his water. The charges against you have been withdrawn, Captain Washington continued, glancing briefly at Officer Brennan, who suddenly found great interest in studying his shoes. My son explained everything to the authorities. He's living with my sister now while I complete my rehabilitation, but he insisted I find you and thank you personally. General Wilson cleared his throat. There's more, Ms. Johnson. When we investigated your background to deliver this message, we discovered something remarkable. He nodded to one of his aides, who stepped forward with a small wooden box. Your father was Command Sergeant Major Richard Johnson, correct? Denise nodded, surprised at the mention of her father. Captain Washington and your father served together in Afghanistan in 2007, the general explained. In fact, according to our records, your father saved Captain Washington's life during an ambush outside Kandahar. Captain Washington's eyes widened in recognition. Johnson, I should have made the connection when Tyler mentioned your name. Richard Johnson pulled me from a burning vehicle after an IED strike. I never knew he had a daughter. He died during his final deployment when I was 18, Denise said softly. He was a hero, Captain Washington replied, his voice thick with emotion. And apparently, heroism runs in the family. The aide opened the wooden box, revealing a medal nestled against dark blue velvet. This is the Soldier's Medal, General Wilson explained. It was awarded to your father posthumously for his actions that day. We've been trying to locate his next of kin for years to deliver it. It seems fate has brought us full circle. Denise reached for the box with trembling hands, the weight of it, both physical and symbolic, momentarily overwhelming. Her father had saved the life of a man whose son she would one day feed without knowing any of their connections. The coincidence seemed too profound to be mere chance. There's one more thing, Captain Washington said. He raised his hand in a formal salute, a gesture of profound respect rarely given to civilians. Behind him, every military person present followed suit, creating a wall of honor in the middle of the small-town diner. On behalf of the United States Army Special Forces, the brothers and sisters in arms of Command Sergeant Major Johnson, and most importantly, on behalf of my son Tyler, thank you. Denise stood frozen, overcome by the knowledge that her simple acts of kindness, pancakes and eggs, a glass of milk, a smile without questions, had connected to something so much larger than herself. The military ritual playing out in front of her, honoring not just her actions, but her father's legacy, created a powerful counterpoint to the suspicion and prejudice she had endured. The diner remained completely silent. Even those who had questioned her motives or spread rumors sat motionless, faces reflecting shock and, in some cases, shame. Officer Brennan had retreated toward the door, his expression unreadable. Todd stood with his mouth slightly open, as if seeing Denise clearly for the first time. I didn't know. Denise finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. I just couldn't let him go hungry. Captain Washington nodded solemnly. Sometimes that's enough, Miss Johnson. Sometimes feeding a hungry child without asking why they're hungry is the greatest kindness of all. As if on cue, the door to the diner opened once more, and Tyler Washington entered, flanked by a woman who shared the captain's features. The boy's eyes immediately found Denise, and for the first time since she'd known him, his face broke into an unguarded smile. He rushed forward, wrapping his arms around her waist in a fierce hug that spoke more eloquently than words. Denise returned the embrace, her hand gently cradling the back of his head in a gesture that came naturally, as if they had known each other far longer than a few months of silent breakfasts. I missed you, Tyler said against her apron. I wanted to tell you what was happening, but everything happened so fast when they found me. It's okay, Denise assured him, kneeling to meet his eyes. You're safe now. That's all that matters. I kept all your notes, Tyler confided. Even the one about the math test. I got an A, by the way. Denise laughed through her tears. I never doubted you would. The week following the military visit transformed Crossroads Diner in ways no one could have predicted. The story spread through town like wildfire, jumping from conversation to social media to the local newspaper. The same Facebook group that had mocked Denise's imaginary charity case now shared a heartfelt retelling of Captain Washington's speech, gathering thousands of shares and supportive comments. Regular customers began requesting Denise's section specifically. They left generous tips with notes of appreciation. Thank you for reminding us what matters, and my brother is in the Navy. Your kindness gives me hope. Todd, who had initially questioned Denise's intentions, hung her father's medal in a small display case near the entrance. Beneath it, he placed a discreet plaque. In honor of those who serve, those who wait, and those who see the hunger others miss. Officer Brennan never returned to the diner, but Denise heard he had been reassigned to desk duty pending a review of his conduct in several cases involving racial profiling. 3 months after the general's visit, Denise received an unexpected letter containing a substantial check and a formal job offer. Captain Washington, now recovering at a military rehabilitation center, had spoken of her to his commanding officers. The military wanted to establish a support program for children of deployed personnel, with special emphasis on identifying those falling through the cracks of the system. They wanted Denise to help design and lead it. That evening, she sat on her fire escape, her father's journal open on her lap. The origami crane Tyler had given her marked the page where her father had written. The greatest acts of service often begin with the simplest recognition of another's humanity. She ran her fingers over his handwriting, feeling a connection across time and space, to her father, to Tyler, to Captain Washington, to all those whose lives intertwined with hers in ways she couldn't have imagined. 6 months later, the Military Family Support Initiative opened its first center, with Denise as its civilian director. The program provided resources, community, and most importantly, dignity to children whose parents served. Tyler, now thriving in his aunt's care while his father completed rehabilitation, became its unofficial ambassador, speaking openly about his experience to help identify other children in similar situations. On the 1-year anniversary of her first accidental breakfast for Tyler, Denise arrived at her office to find a small package waiting on her desk. Inside was a challenge coin, the special token carried by military personnel and given only to those considered part of their sacred brotherhood. One side bore the insignia of the Special Forces. The other had been custom engraved with a simple phrase, Dignitatem Servantem, preserving dignity. A note accompanied it in Captain Washington's strong handwriting. Not everyone who helps needs recognition. Some people just need to know that today, someone isn't hungry, and that alone can change a life. Denise slipped the coin into her pocket, its weight a comforting reminder that kindness offered without expectation sometimes returns in unexpected ways, and that dignity, once preserved, can multiply beyond measure. This story reminds us that what truly matters isn't the color of our skin, but the courage in our hearts to see beyond prejudice and act with compassion. If you believe in building a world where people are judged by their actions rather than their appearance, subscribe now and join our community fighting for justice through storytelling. Type dignity in the comments if you stand with those who choose kindness despite suspicion, and hit that notification bell to never miss another story where truth prevails over prejudice. Remember, small acts of kindness may seem invisible, but their power to change lives resonates across generations. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.